Practical optimism is a habit unto itself, but it's also the habit that begets all habits. Because you could literally take anything you want in life. So the 8 steps are kind of your guide, or like what would I do if I want to be very intentional? And how do you turn your purpose, sort of like purpose into passion, and then passion into purpose? To me, practical optimism is a philosophy, it's a lifestyle, it's a mission, it's a movement that you keep coming back to, that you're like, I got this.
Hi, good peeps. This is the next episode of the Flexible Neurotic podcast. I'm Dr. Sarah Milken, the Flexible Neurotic. Today, I have a guest who you will love as much as I do. You will hear her speak and read her brand new book that I couldn't put down, even though it was the electronic version she sent me, Practical Optimism, the Art, Science, and Practice of Exceptional Well-Being. She's a distinguished psychiatrist and cognitive behavioral therapist based in New York City with over 2 decades of private practice experience, and she served as the pioneering medical director and psychiatrist for the esteemed 9/11 mental health program at NYU, working with all the survivors and families of 9/11. She's a clinical assistant professor of psychiatry at NYU. This guest has garnered national acclaim as a sought-after medical commentator, appearing on major news programs and networks. She can frequently be seen discussing breaking news on the morning news shows, including the Today Show, CBS Mornings, Good Morning America. And she's an international speaker on a million mental health topics, including all women's health initiatives and work-life balance. And for today, she is going to explain how we can cultivate the lives we really want in midlife with a mindset that she calls practical optimism. Her name is Dr. Sue Varma. Hi.
Oh, what a sweet
I'm so happy.
introduction.
I'm so happy you're here. I know you've been on a crazy book tour. I missed you in LA and now you're in New York, but I'm glad we got to like squeeze this in. I think when this comes out, your book will have just come out, so everyone can go and buy it, which I'm really excited about, because sometimes you're like, oh my God, I can't even buy it. But in this case, you can.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you so
So
much.
good. Oh my God. So
Thank you.
happy to have you. And we just had this whole like pre-fun conversation that I didn't record about kids and I don't know, significant others and kids' boyfriends and girlfriends, the whole
Yes.
thing. And her kids,
Yes.
she has 2 sons that are a little bit younger than my kids. I'm like, you just wait.
Yeah.
You
I'm like,
just
I have little.
wait. They're gonna be like, don't psychiatry me, mom.
Yeah.
You just wait. They're like, just because you have a PhD, mom, doesn't mean you understand what's going on in my mind. I'm like, okay, all right.
Yeah.
The intention of this episode is to dig deep and find out why and how midlife women feel so stuck. And we could all learn to take ownership of our lives through feeling our feelings, even the hard ones, renewing our purpose, and finding joy even when things feel really hard. Anyone listening to this podcast is probably on the menopause spectrum of perimenopause, menopause, postmenopause. Listeners, I promise you want to hear this episode. Sue wants to teach us how to dig in what she calls the joy bucket and not dwell in the drudgery drawer. We all have the drudgery drawer. I read, Sue, that when you were working with 9/11 survivors and families, you realized that there were 2 camps of people. There were the people who were just shattered, couldn't get out of bed, completely traumatized as they should be, anxious, depressed. And then there was another camp of people who had a very different response and were manifesting the feelings differently. And it kind of led you down this path. Do you want to talk about that with us?
Yes, thank you. So, when I was working as the 9/11 medical director of the mental health program at NYU, first of all, it was, a unique opportunity to be able to see what it looks like to have mental health in the fold of like a primary care setting. And like that's something I've always wanted for us to have, and I want to see more of it, where like you as a therapist can communicate with their GI doctor, their allergist, like across the hall. And I feel like that facilitates communication between providers and leads to better outcomes, that we know. The second part is I never want to take away or diminish a person's experience if for some reason they experience a traumatic event and then they're not, quote, resilient afterwards, right? Like there's so many factors, psychological, prior history of trauma in their own lives, intergenerational trauma, history of anxiety, family history of anxiety or depression, incarceration in the parents, abuse, things that we consider adverse childhood events. There's any number of things that puts a person at risk for being more likely to develop symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder or mental health problems, right, after a traumatic event. So I never want to minimize or diminish that. But I did notice that there were some people who, after experiencing a traumatic event, not only were able to sort of bounce back, when we look at resilience, that's what it is. It's bouncing back from adversity, but also really flourish, which is thriving in the face of it. And so I became very curious as to what features did these people have that allowed them to be sort of more buoyant in the face of disaster.
Wow, I know. I had this really interesting experience yesterday. And it was kind of a little synchronicity, I think, because I knew that I was meeting you today. And I went to this event, it's a friend's home, and she had a woman whose son was literally executed by Hamas on the highway to the head. And she saw the video of it. And we were all just sitting there in tears, like streaming down. But we couldn't understand how this woman could fly here from Israel, having seen what she's seen, lost her son, and have such a tremendous amount of energy to give to us and to tell her story and to honor her son and herself and her family and Israel and raising money for families in Israel. And I said to her, I said, I'm meeting with a psychiatrist tomorrow who talks about that there's 25% of us are born with this optimism gene, if you call it. And the other 75% of us have to work on it. And I was like, thank you so much for being one of the 25%, kind of representing the other 75%. And she was like, oh my God, I think I need to buy that book.
Thank you so much for talking about it. And you're right. Like what we see is actually one of the key features of resilience is altruism and giving back. And that's what I really saw, is that what a lot of the patients did who never made it into my part of the program, the mental health part, they were there for their routine screenings and make sure that everything was physically checking out okay with them. But they were there to support other people. Like these folks who were super resilient, they would come to the clinic not because they had an appointment, but because their fellow colleagues, people who were working down there, who were living down there, were experiencing panic, agoraphobia, and they're like, I can't take the train, I can't take the subway. So when we see, like, it seems so counterintuitive that in the midst of your own loss and tragedy and grief and disappointment, that you're there to help somebody else. But really, that is what helps us transcend that grief and creates meaning and something what's called post-traumatic growth. Is how do you take some really, really horrible situation and become, I think, stronger. And I think it takes time. You have to grieve, but then you also have to at some point say, all right, how can I turn pain into purpose? And I talk about that, of turning pain into purpose. And altruism is a huge part of resilience, but so is optimism, and up until now, people only thought of optimism as something you were either born with or not. And it's the reason why no one's really ever taken the time to say, let's think about this. Let's think about how do we utilize this to maximize our potential in relationships, in money and finances, at work, with our own mental health, with our own set of goals. How do we turn a trait and turn it into a skill? And that's what I'm doing by talking about practical optimism, is like, for the 75% of us that aren't necessarily born with this glass half full outlook, what can you do? And that's what we saw, is that researchers found that really these genes that they thought coded for optimism actually code for a set of skills. And guess what? We can learn skills. We can teach skills and we can learn them.
So what are the specific skills that, like, if you were teaching a course on how to teach optimism, I mean, I'm sure it goes into sort of Martin Seligman's work on positive psychology, but what I liked about yours, it wasn't just like a self-help book on like how to be happy. It was really digging more into what a lot of us midlife women are going through, is kind of rediscovering our purpose.
Yes. And that's actually the first pillar of 8 pillars. And while there's no particular order. For me, that the order in which I laid it out had a special meaning and arc because it starts with having a purpose, and purpose can be capital P as in what's my purpose in life, or it could be smaller case, lowercase p as in what's my purpose in this specific relationship, in this goal. And what's interesting about purpose is that it's not something, a lot of times people think that they have to find it, right? And they're waiting to be inspired or waiting for motivation to come from the outside. And what I've learned as a cognitive behavioral therapist as well is sometimes we have to put the cart before the horse. And this is a technique from behavioral activation, which is you create motivation, right, by engaging in an activity first, right? And that productivity begets more productivity. And if you say, for example, like, I'm not really feeling inspired to do anything today, right? Whether it's today or my next steps, the research has found is that exercise boosts a sense of purpose in life. So if you're lost, if one day you wake up and you're like, I don't feel like doing anything, first of all, if that's pervasive, then you maybe want to get that checked out, right? Because we know that a purpose gets obscured in the midst of depression and it's harder to feel motivated.
Yeah,
so
and for midlife women who are in like hormone hell, like you could have all the great intention in the world, but you literally can't get your butt out of bed.
Yes. So getting like a medical workup, like finding out like what can you, like hormones, like thyroid, vitamin
Thyroid.
B12, vitamin D, there's any number of like medical things, right? And also talking to the primary care doctor to talk about low mood and depression. But let's say you've got that taken care of and you're like, no, I'm feeling lost. Also recognizing that your purpose doesn't have to come from your paycheck, right? Like that's a really key thing that a lot of times people are looking for purpose from their job. And so recognizing that your purpose can be raising the family, that purpose can be starting a podcast. Like there are any number of things that maybe don't provide financial compensation right now. Hopefully they do at some point, but that doesn't have to be a paycheck tied to be able to derive personal significance and personal meaning to it. The other thing I say is that your purpose 10 years ago does not have to be your purpose today. Your purpose today does not have to be your purpose tomorrow. So if you're able to ask yourself key questions, what brings me great joy in life? And when is the last time that I did it? Because I find that a lot of people, they'll say, I used to love playing a musical instrument. I used to love fill in the blank, pottery, knitting, gardening. I don't do these things anymore. They fell off the wagon. The other thing about purpose is, as much as possible, try to get yourself into a flow state. So I did an interview with the New York Times in the beginning of January. Jancy Dunn, a well writer, did a 6-day a New York Times Well Energy Challenge, and she interviewed me for 2 of those days. And one of them it's called low stakes flow state, where you're finding an activity where you feel completely immersed with what you're doing. Time passes, whether it's writing a blog, whatever it might be, painting, but there's an idea of you're learning, but you're also challenged, finding the sweet spot. So there's so many like nuggets that I give folks when it comes to purpose. But exercise, if you feel like I'm lost, scheduling like a 30-minute, whatever it is, a walk around the block, hitting the gym, hitting weights, whatever it might be, the serotonin, the dopamine, all of that boosts productivity and mood. And then all of a sudden you're like, all right, I'm ready to tackle that difficult email, that message that I needed to send. And that one message, that one email, that one phone call can often change the trajectory of the day, the month, and even your life, right? But you need to put the cart before the horse. That's the bottom line when it comes to purpose.
So from what I hear you saying is it's kind of identifying small things you can do to get that
Yes.
small win. So even though
Yes.
you don't want to run the marathon or whatever, and I always joke, I'm like, where are my fucking endorphins? Like, why don't I love exercise? Like I just posted a reel. I'm like, I'm looking
Awesome.
for them. I don't know where they
Yeah,
are,
I love
but
it.
I do it because I know that I need to
Yes.
for my
Yes.
body, my bones, my heart, like
Yes.
all the things. And I'm so
Yes.
happy I did it. And so in some
Yes.
ways, I think it's endorphins. And at the same
Yes.
time, it's like something you can check off your list.
Absolutely. And
Like
that's
I
why it's
can't
so
work out
important.
at 4 in
Yeah.
the afternoon. No way.
Yes, yes. It check off your list, and then it sets your whole day for success because, like most of us, have it ingrained, whether we do the exercise or not, we have it ingrained that it's something very beneficial. And what you're doing is then tricking your mind into creating an identity around accomplishing things. You say to yourself, I am someone who exercises, right? And like this then brings me to my last pillar. And I said that there is an arc, which is practicing healthy habits. And if you want to think of it as an arc where you're starting with purpose, being very deliberate, very clear, very focused, very intentional. You may know what you want to do, you may not know what you want to do, but then it's creating steps towards building a life or building a goal where then the end is the execution of those goals and those habits. So when it comes to maintaining healthy habits, you want to have an identity around it. So, there's 8 steps of starting with a clear intention. And then the next several steps help you with obstacles and challenges along the way, one of which are your own emotions. Like a lot of times people don't realize that when you talked about where are my endorphins, sometimes we wake up and we're like, I'm in a horrible mood. I have no desire to exercise, right? But if you recognize that those negative emotions are interfering with the execution, right? So then the next pillar is processing those emotions. So there's a variety of things that you can do to go from the first step, which is I want to either find meaning or I want to find more meaning. And that's another part that I talk about is role remake or job crafting. Some people are like, I'm in a 9 to 5 job or whatever job, and I don't love it. And I feel like there's a drudgery, like the drudgery drawer. Like
Yeah.
I don't, this is not pleasurable to me anymore. So it's totally okay to accept that what you did a long time ago that brought you meaning and
Yeah,
joy.
I love
No,
that
no.
part when you talk about how you do need to recognize that like something that brought you joy or you did in the past or you've done up until now may not serve you anymore. And it's
Yes.
okay.
Yes, it's okay to outgrow people, right? It's okay to
Yeah.
outgrow hobbies or interests, or to say like I've done this, and it could be a really great thing that you outgrow. And it seems so weird because you're like, if it's great, why would I outgrow it? But one of my favorite lines, and I've used this, and it came to me, it was something I read once in the midst of like a low point in my life, and I remember reading it says people come into our lives for a reason, a season, or a lifetime. And what that means is like, let's say you meet somebody and they help you cross the street, and like they were your friend, like the metaphor of somebody who made a connection for you or, lent you something, let you sleep on their couch. Maybe they're not a friend that you would open up to or have a deep relationship with. They came through for you in a time of need, right? So that's a reason. And then a season could be someone 5 months in your life, 5 years. And then a lifetime is like that lifelong partnership or journey. And the same way I look at our purpose, right? Your purpose can be something that brought you fun and joy for a portion of time in your life. And it's totally okay to say, you know what, my purpose has changed. And that's a fact because we change as people.
Yeah, I love the fact that you talk about the evolution of purpose because obviously, I mean, not all of us are moms, but many of us are moms. And as we approach those midlife years and we're in those years, we experience empty nest. I'm in half empty nest right now. And I think this is a time where a lot of midlife women tend to kind of rethink their purpose in life because a lot of moms, a lot of people have been stay-at-home moms or they've been career moms, whatever it is. And then they get to this point where they're not needed, and I say that in air quotes, needed as much anymore, and they feel less relevant to the everyday mothering needs of feeling needed. And
Mm-hmm.
now they're like, oh my God, what do I do with this extra time? What's my identity? I'm not Sue's everyday mom anymore. Like she's off in college. I mean, that's how I feel with my son. Like I
Mm-hmm.
adore him, but he's not in my like everyday orbit. I mean, I'm thinking
Yes.
about him and I'm like, why the fuck are you not texting me back? But I'm not managing his day to day of like, did you buy the Tylenol that you said you were going to buy?
Yes.
And
Yes.
so it's sort of like, well, what's my new role now? And for me,
Yes.
that's why I started this podcast and the whole platform. But a lot of my friends, like I've talked about, have like started mahjong and hobbies and pickleball. My husband has become like a golf freak, and
Mm-hmm.
everyone has their thing. And
Yes.
I think sometimes people feel like their thing is too small or
Yes.
their thing is like maybe embarrassing or
Yes.
they're just a beginner at it. And you address that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yes. And like, I feel like it's so key that like our purpose is just for ourselves. Like no one needs to understand it, no one needs to agree with it, and it doesn't have to be fancy. But it has to bring you joy. That's the minimum requirement. Like what brings you joy? What makes you feel maybe like a kid again? What makes you feel curious about the world? What have you always wanted to learn? that maybe you didn't get to. I could say that for me, like, and it's funny that we're talking about emptiness because I'm not at that point just yet, but it's something I think a lot about. And I can just share like a little anecdote, and it's something so small, but like, I love languages. So my parents are from the East. I learned how to speak Hindi growing up. I ended up teaching it as a kid. It was something that was a part of our family. We spent summers, going back to India, spending time in Europe. So travel is a big part, communication, being able to communicate to people in different languages. And I learned Spanish as a kid in school. And I just loved when I would go to Spanish speaking countries that I could feel like I blended in. And we would have these enriching conversations with people who were like, of course you're from the Dominican Republic. Of course you're from Puerto Rico. Of course you're from Costa Rica. Of course you're from
And
Mexico.
you have
How
the
dare you
look
do
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So like I could be from any of those places, right? And I just loved how I could go to 10 different countries and everyone feels like I'm one of them, and being able to blend in and have like juicy, gossipy, relevant conversations in someone else's language and to feel like at home. I've always thought of myself as like a global citizen or universal citizen of the world, right? But one thing that I never got to do, and it was important for me, but I wanted to always do a semester abroad, and I never got to do it. And it was like in those days, you didn't college courses like I was pre-med and wanted to go to medical school and did, but they didn't offer organic chemistry in English in Spain, for example. So it really, and you're on this track, and I was working full time in college. So there was a variety of things, barriers that why that couldn't happen. And I've continued doing medical missions abroad. And in 9/11 program, we spoke Spanish, but that I know that there's a time and a place when your brain is developing. And if you were to spend 3 or 4 months at a younger age, fully immersed, having that freedom and that time, it would have been a different outcome. And that's just a small personal value of mine, right? To be proficient in one more language. And I'm very good intermediate, but it's not like native. So that's something I have in my mind that like when the opportunity arises, maybe I'll get one of my kids to do a semester abroad, and maybe I'll be one of those like stalker moms who gets an apartment off campus and I'm doing my thing.
I could be one of those too. I totally get it.
Yeah. So, so for now it's Duolingo and me talking to any Spanish speaking person that'll have me and converse and whenever opportunities arises. But that's just one small example of like, what are those unfulfilled dreams that you've put on the back burner? And like, if you are in a position, even if it's just taking a local class as an artist, as, someone who likes to knit or weave or mahjong, like, so what brings you joy? And populate your calendar with that like today, like that, like if that's the take home they're going to take is the joy, and scheduling it in your calendar. And I literally, before I was talking to you, Sarah, like I had sessions with patients, and one of them I said I talk about the 4 M's of mental health, and we'll get to that, but they're like 4 science-backed habits. And I was like, back in the day when we didn't have digital and we would write patients prescriptions, I would write movement, seeing friends and purpose. And in person, I would put that on the prescription pad when we had it, because I wanted to impart the importance of like, this is as important as any other pill or any other prescription a doctor would give you. So like they loved it, and they were also like, what the hell are you doing? Like I was coming to you for, a Prozac or Zoloft. I'm like, nope, like medication has its place for sure, but like there's so many other things that are free and that are natural, like for those who need it, yes. But if you at the end of the day, you're still going to need to do these other natural sort of holistic habits to get better, because we know that once person stops medication, a lot of times the symptoms of anxiety or depression can come back. So what's really going to make a difference are those lifestyle habits, those coping skills that you invested in.
All right, well, let's talk about the 4 M's.
Yes. So the 4 M's of mental health, and these are like science-backed, my go-to non-negotiable habits that a person can and should schedule like every day if you only have 10 minutes for each of them, or every week at least. The first one is meaningful engagement. And this is by far my favorite. And I feel like it's not just how I feel, we are in a loneliness crisis. Yeah. And everyone, like whether it's teenagers, whether it's greatest generation, whether it's midlife moms, like a lot of times women have paid attention to their careers or to their families. Those friendships have kind of gone on the back burner. So when you meet with a friend, first of all, the intention and being deliberate about it. So when I was in LA, I tried to squeeze in, even though I was there specifically for taping podcasts and I was there for my book, I tried to squeeze in as much social visits as I could. And it was, I give so much respect to you with the LA traffic, like trying to coordinate with people coming
from
all over. Yeah, but and that just showed how intentional we all were in going out of our way to make it happen with all the barriers. It was so easy to flake out and be like, I'm
Oh
so
my God,
sorry, my
last
kid is.
night when I went to that event for Israel, my friend who hosted it, she's like, how long did it take you to get here from the Palisades? And I was like, it doesn't really matter. She's like, just tell me. I'm like, 55 minutes. And it's like 5 miles. I mean, it's like
Mhm. Yes,
ridiculous. And she's
yes.
like, thank you so much for doing that. You really do have to make it intentional.
Yes, absolutely. And if you don't, like, it's not going to happen. So think of it like I would say, like all of these habits, just every single day, think of it like my life depends on them. Because we do know that when you look at midlife women, whether it's the weightlifting, whether it's the in-person meaningful friendships, all of this, if you want to predict how someone's health is going to be, of course, barring things that we cannot control health-wise, but the chronic illness, and that's like the vast majority, I want to say at least when you look at the number of people over 65 that are on 4 or 5 medications, it's more than half. And so chronic illnesses are what most people are dying from. Um, your quality of your life is going to depend on the quality of your relationships. And midlife has a lot to predict on the quality of your relationships at 80. Like, so this is the time, because a lot of time people feel like, oh my God, like the time has passed. I lost my childhood friends, or I'm not in touch with the college friends. And even the ones when my kids were really young, we're no longer in touch because the kids are all doing their own thing with their own phones. So like I'm not in the mix of those women and those friendships, but it's never too late. So the meaningful friendships are so key because we know that active listeners live on average 4 years longer. People who have active listeners in their life will live on average 4 years longer. So, and people who have active listeners are less likely to have cognitive decline. So, and loneliness kills people, right? It's like the equivalent of smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So I could go on and on about the neuroscience of loneliness, how it has the same neural circuitry in the brain as depression, and all the reasons why you don't want it. The likelihood of dying of any cause increases for people who are lonely. Loneliness is not just about the number of people in your life, it's about the quality of the
Yeah.
connection. Do you feel seen and do you feel heard? And I think a lot of barriers to really developing meaningful relationships that no one talks about is our hustle culture of accomplishment, achievement, and wanting to seem like we have it all put together and figured out. And I think that's preventing people from just being very raw and honest, authentic, and vulnerable with one another.
Yeah, I also think that it relates to something that you talk about in the book called the iceberg. Was it called the
Hmm.
iceberg
Yes,
effect?
yes,
Tell
yes,
us
yeah.
about that. It's making me think about that.
Yeah, totally. No, and thank you so much, first of all, for like taking the time to read. And like
Oh,
you're like a subject matter expert on it. I
I'm
love it.
like a
And
nerd.
I love it. That makes me so happy. Like, because you spend years and years like sitting in a cave writing this,
Oh
doing
my
tons of
gosh.
research, and that somebody can appreciate and understand and like nerd out with you. So thank you for that.
Oh,
Yeah, the iceberg effect is like we only see 10%, right? Like we see the finished product, we see just the success, and we're not seeing there's something else also called the duck syndrome, where like person like you see the duck's head above water and everything looks fine, and then underneath the water there's like, oh my God, I'm drowning, I'm drowning. So the iceberg effect is a little bit different. It shows the success, but what you don't see, you just see the head that, like, let's say the hair is all done, like the metaphor of the person's head looks perfect, but you don't see the years of hard work, the years of sacrifice. And I feel like with social media, the finished product is what the takeaway is, and we're seeing everyone's finished product, everyone's highlight reel, and not just the people that are in our social circle, but the billions of accounts that we have access to. And it's constantly diminishing our sense of self. Why haven't I achieved this by now? And so the comparisons really is the thief of joy, and it's endless, and success is a moving target. So I feel like when we talk about the 4 M's of mental health, the meaningful engagement is being honest. Share something about yourself that makes you feel uncomfortable, that makes you slightly feel embarrassed, but it should be with people you trust. So that's the other thing. It's not just opening up to anyone and everyone, it's opening up with people that you trust. And also never minimize the importance of superficial connections. I see that a lot in sort of like hustle culture where people like, I don't have time for chit chat, especially like maybe sometimes younger folks, they're like the ones who are like super busy and on a mission. When you got the headphones on, you telling everyone, do not disturb, not open for business, do not look at me, don't make eye contact. And that's something that we kind of lost in the pandemic, is those built-in layers of like, talking to the barista, talking to the grocery store clerk. Like people laugh at me. I share this about myself, and I think people literally want to like, I don't even know what, but I tell them I talk to my Uber drivers and they're like, "You do what, Sue? Why?" And I was like, because I like learning. I want to know where people are from. If I'm busy and if I'm like totally tapped out, I love the feature that you can like request a quiet car. And I don't know if the quiet is just no music or like they're also not going to talk to you, or maybe I'm just interactive and engaged and people like talking to me. But anyway, the point is, don't overextend yourself if you're not feeling safe. No need to talk to anyone that you're not feeling comfortable with. The point is just keep your eyes and ears open for social interaction and look at
Yeah,
that
and
as
it's
like
like taking
social.
the extra minute. Like my kids always laugh, but now they do it because they've watched me do it for so long. But like if there's a server in a restaurant or somebody working in a pharmacy and they're wearing name tags, I use their name because I
Love that.
want them to feel like, oh, I'm a person and she sees me and she knows that I have a name and I'm not just like a server. And at first, when my kids were young, they're like, that's so annoying and so embarrassing. And now, like, I'll be on the phone with my son and he's like getting a package from like his Amazon packages and he's like knows the guy's name at the desk and he's totally
Oh my
referencing
God.
him. And I'm like, see, like he feels
Love
seen
that.
because you did
Yes.
that.
Yes. And I love what you're saying because it makes me think the other day I was talking to somebody and one thing I remember growing up is that my parents were always so kind to other people, and no matter where we went, they exactly what you're saying, knowing the person's name, and then they would invest, like let's say they were their favorite restaurants. They would know about the server, the managers, family members. They would bring gifts, like 'cause if it was their favorite restaurant, they would be there a lot. They would be like, I brought you something. You mentioned it's your daughter's baby shower or whatever it is. So they developed personal relationships with people wherever they went. And then they were also very calm and pleasant when things didn't work out their way. They would be like, I totally get where you're coming from. At the same time, here are my needs. So much of what I know, I learned from watching them. And I love that your son is picking that up from you. And that respect and the human connection that you go out of your way to establish. That's beautiful.
Yeah, and
And
I
I feel like
also
everyone
think,
needs that.
yeah, like even the parking guy at school when my kids weren't driving, like I always like knew all of their names because when you're asking someone for a favor and you need to
Yeah.
park here and you need to do that, like everyone wants to be a human being and
Yes.
has a name and wants to
Yes.
be recognized for what they're doing. It just takes that like extra step. And like you said, I think with like social media and quick interactions, like you were even talking about how, like, even with teenage relationships, it's weird because, like, you and I, when we were dating our husbands, like, we would have like long phone conversations and in person conversations. And now with this Snapchat thing of undelivered, unopened, I don't even know what they're talking about. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
how is that a relationship?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
Mm-hmm.
how has these weird 3 word
Yes.
statements
Yes.
or three
Yes.
letters, IDK, I don't even know what
Yes.
those are. I have
Yes.
to Google them.
Totally. And what's so interesting is that there's something called the shallowing hypothesis, where as a society, everything is getting dumbed down. So
Oh,
I don't know if you ever read the book 19, I want to say with George Orwell's 1984, but
no,
like
but of course, I know about it.
yeah, and like the thought police and like the dictionaries, like they just got smaller and smaller and less words. And so the shallowing hypothesis is like our connections are superficial, the way that we consume information, like short form content. Like
Oh,
literally, I remember it went from, oh, a reel could be, or like a short form video. Short form was considered, let's say, 3 minutes, and now it's like 30 seconds, and then it's turning into 15 and maybe even three. It's like if you don't capture the audience attention in the first 3 seconds. And so we have no bandwidth for people. And that's a problem because we expect people to not create frustration, right? And then what happens is that you have no frustration tolerance when you can't handle it. So that's why relationships, like when you talk about the whole swiping, we are treating people like commodities that I can order a person on Tinder. I can order a food from Grubhub, right? I can order a package from Amazon. People and relationships are getting watered down. Our communication is getting dumbed down. We're not having these negotiation skills. Kids are losing opportunities to break up with people in a normal way, right? It's like, I'm not feeling it. Sorry.
it's
Like
like you're
a
missing
word.
the tone of voice. Like my
Mm-hmm.
daughter says to me, oh, can you send an email to school this morning because I'm leaving early? So I send it and she's like my supervisor. She's like, make sure you CC me because she wants to make sure I did it, right? She's like
Yeah.
mini me. And then she's like, then she texts me and she goes, I just don't understand why you have to use annoying emojis. And I said, I use emojis because I feel like the tone of voice is missing
Hmm.
from the writing. And I don't want to spend 5 hours writing to the lady that works in as like the abs, that what do you call them? Like the enrollment absence supervisor,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
I don't want to like write an extra 5 sentences to be all sweet and cute if I just put an emoji like road closure and then like a screaming face. It's like, okay, she gets it. And my daughter's
Yes.
like, I don't know what you're doing. That's so awkward. It's
That's,
so
it's so
funny.
it's so funny. And also like when we look at the generational differences,
Oh my
and
God.
something that you had said that I thought was really funny when you were like your kids were watching you and you're talking in the beginning, they would make fun of you or be awkward about it. Like my kids will, if I'm talking to somebody and I'm friendly and I'm asking them questions about themselves, like genuinely wanting to get to know them, one of them was like, Mom, don't be such a stalker, And it's like,
Oh,
no, like being friendly, why, or even showing eagerness, showing
totally.
interest. Why is that like ick and cringe? And one thing I remember, I think talking about Taylor Swift, because that's on
Yes,
everybody's
that's
mind
all
these
we're
days.
talking about these days.
Yeah. I think it was at the NYU commencement speech that she had given like several years ago, but it was something about like, don't be afraid to let people know that you're interested, that you're earnest, that you're eager. And I like loved that because I was like, that has helped me succeed or get to where I am in life, is not being afraid of showing my enthusiasm and showing my interest. And I feel like everyone now, like a lot of times people are like, we're too cool or we want to seem cool. And I'm like, great, I don't have time to play games. If I'm interested in something, a person, an idea, whatever it is, I want to make it clear that I'm interested and I want to
Yeah, and
know
if
and
the
I want to
person
learn.
says no or they don't accept your invitation or whatever,
Yeah.
it's like, okay,
Yes.
next.
Yes, exactly. Okay, next. And that is the essence of practical optimism, right? You try and it doesn't work out. Okay, next. Moving right along, right?
I
And
know
like,
you could start an entire practice with this topic for college admissions. And the bottom line is it's not personal.
mhm, mhm,
Like it's not personal. You're not getting in that college and that person got in and this and that, because at the end of the day, a lot of these kids really look the same on paper. And it's
mhm,
like that
mhm,
person got lucky and you didn't, and blah, blah, blah. But it doesn't mean they don't like you. And it doesn't mean you're not smart. And it doesn't mean you're not a good person. And having gone through it with my son and now I'm embarking on it again with my daughter, I'm happy that my daughter has had the experience of seeing my son go through it, because it kind of gives
mhm.
her a sense of resilience, like, oh, that happened to him and he was fine, and that
Yes.
happened to him and he
Yes.
was fine.
Yes, yes. And you're making me think that like how our identity has to come from more than one place. And I feel like what I'm seeing now in this generation compared to like the way maybe like we were raised, of course it depends on the family and every family has different amount of emphasis, but like, traditionally the growing up in the, I don't know, 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was like go be, go child, go play, right? And then the parents get involved on a need to know basis, right? And so we are way more involved in our children's lives, social, emotional, academic, than any other generation ever has been, ever.
Oh my God,
Like,
both my parents worked full time. Like my mom didn't know what grade I got on my math test at 1:30 in the afternoon.
yeah,
And I was
yeah,
telling Lisa Demore, like when I did my podcast with her and she's the teenage expert, I was like, I didn't have a phone. Like I didn't text my mom what happened 5 minutes ago. Like she would get
yes,
home from work at 5:30 or 6, and like maybe I remembered to mention it, maybe I didn't. But now we're all seeking that like instant
yes,
response. Why my kids are like, why didn't you text me back? I'm like, you need to chill.
yes,
Like
yes,
not everything is instant.
totally. No, and that's such a great point because whether it's instant gratification and like not having the ability to deal A with rejection is what you're saying, and then B not dealing with an instant response, and like that's going to be a problem. And like and here's the problem is because that's fine to expect it from your app, right? Like we are no longer living in the dial-up internet days where like it can take 5 minutes to get to load a website. 100%. But that same kind of lack of frustration tolerance and lack of ability to have delayed gratification, that is going to cause problems. And if you were to ask me when we look at mental health problems in young people, it has to do with delayed gratification, right? Of like, and also where's your sense of meaning and identity coming from? And if college, and I understand the pressure, and all parents want their kids to succeed, and I feel like we are putting in an inordinate amount of pressure because we as parents, our entire meaning and our entire world and our lives are focused around our children, their happiness, and their success. And I feel like that's too tall of an order for us. It's too tall of an order for them. And also that equating happiness and success also, I feel like, is a fallacy because they're not related, right? And one of, some of the books that I love talk about this idea of happiness, meaning, let's say, mental health has to come first. Success comes as a result. And I think all too often we're pushing our kids that like, if you get into a good college, therefore you will then be successful and therefore you will then be happy. And
Oh
it's
my
like, let's
gosh,
back
there
up.
was that book. Of course, I have midlife brain. I can't remember what it was called, where the author was talking about all these
Yes,
kids who were like dying to get into
yes,
Yale.
yes,
Then
yes,
they get to Yale and they're like, I hate this.
yes.
Why
And
did
I
I
think it
do
was like,
all that?
yes, I think like I know like Sean Aker has talked about like the
Mm-hmm.
happiness advantage, and I want to say that there was a study, if I'm not mistaken, and they talk about kids at Harvard, and they're like over the course of like those 4 years, they only had, and this is the book is several years now, right? So don't quote me on the study, but
Yeah.
how over the course of 4 years they might have had like one serious relationship, like romantic relationship, and they're like, we want people to be out there and have lives and make mistakes and interact like your whole world cannot be about achieving success. And so in my practice, I'll often see young adults, like, whether it's like high school into college, college into first job, and onwards. And they have never paid attention to their mental health. They have never paid attention. And so like things worked out because they were brilliant until it didn't. And then it's like you're hitting a wall. Like your whole life, you've done well in school, you've done well in sports. Let's say you're also likable, the world has pushed you along and you keep getting more and more forward until like that first job, let's say out of college, where either you didn't get the job you wanted or you got the job you wanted, and then the boss isn't giving you the promotion or the salary. Like there are factors and circumstances outside of you. And it's kind of like what you're saying, like don't take it personally. But it's hard if you've always been successful, if you've always gotten things have always worked out your way, it can be a very rude
Well, I
awakening.
think, yeah, that's what's happening, I think, in the college acceptance scene right now is these kids are used to like getting good grades and getting good scores and getting things how they want them. And then the admissions come and they're like, wait, what? I don't, this doesn't make sense to me. And then
Yes,
you feel
yes.
badly for the kid, you feel badly for the parent, and it's like, oh my God, what's happened here? But related to that, I like the story you tell in your book. I can't remember what the patient's name was, but it was a man, and he was talking about how he had been going on in his life. He was married, he had a job, whatever. Everything seemed fine until it wasn't. And it kind of
Mm-hmm.
reminds me of that. It's like you plunk along, you get to midlife, and now you're like, I'm kind of dissatisfied. Now I'm kind of being snippy with my kids. My wife is annoying me, and the woman at work is flirting with me, and that seems really fun. And your response, I'm sure over more than one session, was like, hey, you can blame all these other things, but like, where's your ownership in this? And I
Yes,
think the ownership and self-responsibility and self-agency piece is so key in the midlife
yes,
journey. And I
yes,
want you to talk about that because I feel like so many of us, including myself, like we're waiting to be rescued. We want the
yes,
magic pill. We want
yes.
the like knight in shining armor to come down and be like, Sarah, I have this great career for you right now, and
Yes.
it's in a box ready to go.
Yes, yes. Look, I 100% respect and can appreciate that wanting to be rescued because I think we're exhausted, right? Like if we're talking to women, even men, right? But we've had to do a lot for ourselves. Like assuming that like you didn't born with the silver spoon in your mouth and you didn't have 17 people come and wipe your butt. I'm thinking about like the movie
Yeah.
The Little Emperor, like you didn't have like you don't have a
Yeah.
whole staff coming after you and picking up your clothes like 5 times a day. you're tired, we're exhausted, like, and especially when you add in the midlife piece, right, of the hormonal changes, or you're emotionally exhausted of caring for everybody else, carrying the mental load,
Yeah, aging
taking,
parents.
yes, yes, the sandwich generation of like, and I know exactly what that's like. So I don't blame anyone who wishes and wants to just kick back, relax, and be taken care of. Like, feed me the grapes, fan me, like, bring it on,
Yes.
right? So maybe, and find out what's your version of that doesn't cross the line, right, in your marriage, if that, assuming you want to stay married, right? Or whatever that rescue fantasy is, right? How can you, like, it could be a women's trip. Like, there's all these articles being written. I want to say maybe Wall Street Journal about women going like 50, 40, 50, 60, 70, going on girls' trips. And a lot of times I'm seeing women are like very much fulfilled in each other's company and nourished in a way, sort of emotionally, that like maybe they wish that they got from their partners, right? But like often maybe
But
not.
that's a
And
really
that's
good
okay to
point
have,
too, because not one person can fulfill all of our needs. And I think that
yes.
that's a really important point because, what your husband brings to you is different than what your three girlfriends and a trip to
Hmm.
Cabo is bringing to you.
Yes.
And our
Yes.
job is to find all those little pieces to fit
Yes.
together to cultivate
Yes.
what we define as a meaningful life.
Yes.
And
Exactly. And it doesn't have
everybody's
to.
definition is going to be different.
Yes, totally. And this week actually, I don't know if you follow Esther Perel, but like,
I
I
do.
love her work. Yeah. And she was kind enough to mention in her newsletter that she's reading Practical Optimism, and it's like a conversation starter and people should get it. And I love her work. And what I love is that she always talks about how there's so much pressure on our relationships these days, that we want that one person to be everything, our savior. When it used to take a village and a tribe that we would get our emotional, intellectual needs met from, now it's all one person. And I think of that in terms of the pressure on the nuclear family, right? Like, there are no extended family members, cousins. We're not living in the same small hometown that we grew up. We're all seeking opportunities, bigger, better, maybe urban. There's some stat that like by 2050, I don't know, 60+% of the population is all going to be in urban areas, right? So you have these densely
Mm.
populated areas where people are coming for betterment, socioeconomic, education, whatever it might be, but we're leaving behind small town values, small town friendships, being there for one another. Like, okay, what do you need? You moved, I'm going to bring you food. Somebody passed away, I'm bringing you food. What, like, I'm not
Yeah,
saying food is the
basic
only love language.
things.
Yes, but caring for one another. So I think the reality and the disappointment, and a lot of times you're seeing a lot of divorce midlife, right? And that can be a lot of, it's a very interesting transition. I remember like whether it's divorce or recognizing gaps in your marriage. Like, I remember, I don't know if it was Oprah that had said like the wisdom of menopause, of how like there's an awakening where women experience um like finding who you are and recognizing like, do I even want to be married to this person anymore? And that's an interesting transition when you do become an empty nester. A lot of times people are like, yeah, like our kids were the only glue that kept it together and they're not in the picture. Do we really even want to stay married anymore? So all sorts of things
And
happen.
people are
People think,
living so much longer. Like my husband and I were laughing the other day, like we're going to be 50 when we're empty nesters.
mhm,
And so we have so much more life ahead of us because
mhm.
people are living longer. It's like we have our whole next
Yes,
chapter. And so if you
yes,
don't like your spouse, like this is the time to kind of like dig in and figure things out. Like I'll be honest, my husband and I laugh, like he's a hobbyist. I'm not. I feel like
mhm.
I'm gonna have like dementia and be in an old age home, and he's gonna
No,
be like on the golf course with some like hottie, whatever, riding around in a golf cart because he is constantly like
mhm,
immersed in his hobbies. And we don't have any common hobbies. Like our common hobby is like walking the dog, watching a TV show. But like he plays the piano, I don't. He plays golf, I don't. So I'm like, we got to think of something where we can meet halfway. And I don't
yes.
cook, and neither does he. So we've started this thing, and where I think we've made 2 or 3 meals together. Are they like the most amazing thing? Would I serve them to you? No. But it's
Mhm.
like a nice little joint thing where it's
I
like,
love it.
wait, do you know how to chop an onion? No, wait, do
Hmm.
you? Do you have to take the skin off? I don't know if you have to take the skin off. And then we're like Googling it.
Yes,
Like that's how basic it
yes,
is.
yes. No, but that is so endearing to me. And I think it's so sweet that even if it didn't work out, what I love about that is just your intention of like prioritizing your relationship and saying we need to invest in it and let's find something, right? Because most people never even get to that point of number one saying, I see you, I like you. I remember like only in the last couple of years, like my husband and I like were in a place where we could take trips like together, right, without the kids, right? They're a little bit like able to function by themselves. The grandparents are in the picture. They were in school, so we could take like an extended weekend, and it was so powerful. And I remember when my husband would get back from these trips, and they're not often, but they were very meaningful. But when he would get back, his coworkers would say to him, "You went alone with your wife, just the two of you?
Like you didn't bring
Wait."
golf friends with you?
Yeah, yeah. He's like, they were like, you must actually, you and your wife must actually like each other. Like it was
Totally.
bizarre because I want to say half or more of his coworkers had already been divorced or were going through it, and it was a foreign concept that like you wouldn't come with the entourage or or you're going someplace where
Like a
you were just going to.
buffer.
Yes, a buffer, totally. And children are the buffer, alcohol, going to all-inclusive resorts where you're just drinking yourself into alcohol into oblivion, like anything, the escapism to not have to confront the reality of you are not happy with where you are in life, where you are with this person in life. So, and that's another thing is that like you said about taking agency and taking responsibility, that's really what practical optimism is about. It's about recognizing, okay, waking up one day and taking ownership of the fact that maybe you're not where you wanted to be right now. And that's 100% okay. It
Yeah,
is
you
okay
might
to
have
say,
extra pounds. You might
yes,
have whatever. It's so many
yes,
different manifestations of it.
yes. And that a big part of it is self-compassion, is recognizing it's okay. Don't beat yourself up. Like imagine if you had a small child, whether it's yours or somebody else's child that you're close to or that you love, and they were like, "Oh my God, I spilled the whole cereal," right? You look at the cereal on the floor and you're like, "Oh my God, that is a disaster." But imagine them crumbling under the weight of it. Like, I'm a horrible person and starting to beat themselves up, literally like self-flagellation. You would immediately get over the anger of the cereal being spilled and you'd be like, listen, this is on a 1 to 10. This is not a really serious issue. We'll figure it out. Come here. And you'd hug them and you'd soothe them and then you'd work on the problem solving of the cereal, cleaning it up. So think about the next time you wake up and you're like, oh my God, how did I end up here? Do that for yourself, right?
I like
Soothe
that.
that inner child and say, it's fine, it's okay, you're not a horrible person. And then what? And then we see studies show in self-compassion that once you don't engage in shame and blame and you're able to recognize and be mindful and be like, you know what, everyone goes through something like this. Everyone spills cereal in their life. Like, what are we going to do? How are we going to clean it up? And that's what self-compassion does, is it shuts down shame and blame and it gives you a road to recovery. It gives you a road to be able to clean up whatever the mess is.
I love that. And then what I do is I'm like, my husband's out, the dog vomits, and I text him and I'm like, the dog vomited. I went upstairs. The dog is in your domain. I already did kid vomit. And he just laughs. And then I send the barf emoji where the guy's throwing up. And then he comes home and like whatever, cleans it up. But it's like a
So sweet.
partnership. It's like you gotta
Yeah.
like bend on
Yes.
certain things, meet people
100.
halfway, but
Yes.
it's not always perfect.
Yes, but you know that I love the hobbyist thing, and I would say like I love that you're doing this podcast and like you're expressing your own creative interests and like things that are and causes that you're passionate about and meaningful and like that's all key because when you look at optimism, these folks live longer. They live to like 80 or 90 because and not just longer years, but longer years spent in good health. Because what good is longer years if it's spent
Yeah,
debilitated,
shitty.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
So
I'm sure you know Eve Rodsky, and she's been on my podcast twice, and she talks about like being interested and interesting.
yes,
You
yes.
don't have to be a New York Times bestseller to be interesting, but like when you sit
Hmm.
down at a dinner table and the person sits down next to you, like you don't want them, especially if you're a stay-at-home mom, like the worst question to be asked, because I've been there, is, so what do you do? And I'm like, okay, could you not ask me that? What am I supposed to
Yeah.
say? Like, I'm a
Yeah.
mom, I'm a na na na. I hate that question. But like, even if you're just talking about things and you're like, oh, I just took up golf or I just took up mahjong or whatever, it's like
Mhm.
you have something to talk about. You're doing yoga.
Yes.
Oh, I just started meditation. I'm the worst meditator, but I'm working
Yeah.
on it. It kind
Yeah.
of gives you something to bring to the table.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. And at the same time, I would say like own your life choices. Like, you don't have to explain yourself to anyone. They don't have to get, like, if being a mom is fulfilling and that's where you derive meaning and pleasure, and sometimes maybe not. Maybe sometimes you're like, this is really effing hard and no one's patting me on the back. Like, to be able to own that, to be able to own all of it. But again, you don't have to answer to anybody, right? So I feel like a lot of times people feel that pressure of like, I'm not interesting. And it's like, okay, I love what you said, Sarah. Like, if you feel that way, then take up something so that you
Yeah.
are,
So you
but
have
really
something
do.
to say, even if it's
Yes,
like an activity or a hobby.
totally,
Like my husband's
totally.
not talking about his career, like he's talking about like his golf swing, and he found this like this teacher that's 45 minutes away, and now he watches this weird guy on YouTube, and I'm like, "Oh my God, you sound like you have like some kind of obsession or something."
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah. But
you pick the topic for the audience,
yes, yes,
and
yes.
it's
But the most important audience is you, right? So like the fact that
yes,
he's doing
yes.
this for himself, like it brings him meaning and joy. And then yeah, if anyone else gets pleasure from listening about it, great. But like,
I don't, but
yeah,
yes.
oh, somebody else.
I know. I'm like, oh my God. Okay, wait. So wait, let's get back. So I do love the piece about doing things because they feel good to you. So
Yeah.
how do is there like a specific tool? Like, how do we ignore the social comparison? Or like, how do we ignore like, oh my God, I want to write a book, and Sue wrote a book, and she's been on this crazy podcast tour, and she's going to make the bestseller list, and I'm random. Like, how do you
Mhm,
get around that?
mhm.
Your
Such a
inner
great
bitch.
question. Yes, yes. And just say, you know what? So I always say, like, FOMO, fear of missing out, is often an opportunity for yourself to figure out, do I actually want to scratch that itch, right? So if the itch is anything, fill in the blank, writing a book, doing a crazy podcast tour, being on a cool podcast, like your podcast, for example, traveling, like whatever it is that you're seeing, everyone live this life. Recognize that, get the full story. That's the first thing I would say, right? Is ask that person, tell me the not so glamorous moments of your life, right? So like if somebody asked me, I would be like, oh, how long do you have to hear about the not so glamorous
Oh
moments
my
of my
God,
life?
me? I'm
Because
like, do you want to talk about the midlife vagina? Let's talk about that. And my
let's talk
kids are
about.
mortified. My husband's mortified. But I think that's part of this podcast and platform is there has to be like a relatability factor.
Yes,
Like,
yes,
she's not perfect. She fucking
yes,
hates working out. She doesn't want to ruin her hair, her blow dry. She
yeah.
wears makeup. She doesn't want to redo her makeup. So she has to figure out how to work out to not sweat. And it's like real people, real shit,
Yes,
real life.
yes. And I love that because it's very practical. Like if you've mastered that art, like tell me please, because like I want to know. And at the same time I say, look at the FOMO, and if you're feeling it, ask yourself like, all right, like when you look at that, like for me, for example, when I look at that perfect, let's say 6-pack ab, I'm like, yeah, but I know what went into that, right? And like I respect that person for doing it, but I don't know if that's for me, and like commitment. And I could say the same thing. Like if somebody's like, I want to do what you do, I'm like, okay, but you know what it involves is years of sacrifice, being in a dark hole in a cave and spending hundreds of hours a week doing research and not having a life. Like you show up just for the, moments of doing this and this, but that there were a lot of sacrifices made. And like the other person, like anytime we want to embark on a journey, do the due diligence, do the homework and the research to say, this is how that person got from point A to point Z. I love the finished product, but I have no interest in doing A, B, C until Z. And then a lot of times that helps quiet that voice of, I want to be on this journey simply because this other person has made it. Because you don't know what they've had to give up. And here's the problem: no one wants to admit that they were sweating. A lot of times people will say, oh, it was easy peasy and effortless, like the effortless look, the effortless glam, the no makeup look. It's like, no, bro, tell them what you went through, right? And then let the people decide if that's what they want, right? Because that's what they have to do. These are the sacrifices and the challenges. So I feel like it's never meant to not inspire someone, because if someone came to me and said, I want to write a book, I really want to do it, I understand there's a lot involved, that's a different question. Lead me, guide me to the logistical steps that are involved because I'm ready for it. But, I think I talk about this under the pillar of proficiency, that like there's 4 ways, and Albert Bandura, the researcher, talks about like learning. How do we learn? How do we develop self-efficacy? We do this from the best one is doing things ourselves. Another one is by role models, vicarious learning, getting feedback. So I feel like doing your homework to be like, what do I want? What was involved? What will be entailed? What do I have to give up? Am I willing to make those sacrifices? But at the end of the day, if your FOMO is telling you this is something you need to do, that it's creating FOMO, creates anxiety, it creates irritability, it creates a feeling of like longing and wanting and wishing. Ask yourself, if I really do want it, that's maybe why I'm feeling this way. And then what are the
Yeah.
steps so I can get it? If I see people traveling, as I see people having fun with their friends, am I craving that? And there's nothing wrong in craving mastery and career success, more friendships, more love, right?
Yeah,
Like
because
more
you're
travel.
basically saying like the things that you have a little bit of envy on are
Yes,
sometimes the things that you want, and
yes,
use that as inspiration rather
yes,
than a
yes,
trigger.
yes, exactly. And then if it is a trigger, recognize it. And you know what can be helpful is to be like, yeah, I want that, but I don't have what it takes, or maybe I don't want to do it right now. And then shut it off, right? Then just be like, listen, this is where it maxes out. There's going to be a tipping point when it's the inspiration then turns to sort of
Yeah,
criticism
like
and sort
I
of
want a
self-blame.
six pack, but I'm not willing
Yeah.
to give up all sugar. I'm not willing to not eat carbs. It's like, what's your good enough? And like, what are you willing,
Yes.
what stakes are you willing to put in?
Yes. Yes.
And everyone's
Yes.
is so different.
Yes. Yes. And recognizing that, like, you know what? I love what they've done and I'm happy for them. And maybe it comes easier to them. Maybe it's what drives them. Maybe it's what they need, right?
It's like,
Or it's
what do
what they,
you want to do when you, like, not every day, but most days, like you wake up and you love your job. Like
yeah.
you get purpose out of that. You get
Yes.
meaning out
Yes.
of that. Like you look
Yes.
forward to it. It doesn't mean every day is a walk in the park. But if
Yes.
every day you dreaded that, you wouldn't do it.
No, no, exactly. And I want people to listen to that signal because I think a lot of times we try to quiet it because society wants us to do something. It's kind of like think of it your parents or like society, because I know that this was something I grew up with, like not for me personally, but friends of mine, where their parents had drilled it into their head. You need to have this kind of partner with this kind of income, with this kind of socioeconomic family background, like all of these checklist criteria. And your heart knows that's not what you want, whether it's a partner or a job, and you just try to suppress it. And then you go along with what other people tell you, and then you're miserable and you're unhappy, right? So we never want that to happen, where you follow a course, a trajectory in your life, whether it's a relationship or career, because it seems sexy or glamorous or cool, when inside you're like, this is not for me. And so many people, I hate to say this, and I don't mean this in a bad way, they live a life of a lie because they're not authentic and true to what they really want, because what they want is in opposition to what society wants for them. So I feel like that's, to me, the most unfortunate of circumstances. But it's okay, because some people will live that way their entire life, they'll never know it. Other people will confront it in midlife, and they'll say like, oh my God, I've been living this way with this person or with this identity and I'm ready to shed it. So all things are possible.
And what I love about this midlife point, even though it's so fucking hard sometimes, and sometimes I'm like, oh my God, this everything about this feels hard. Like I said, because we're living so much longer, we have so much agency to make those
Yes.
changes. Like if you see your parents at 80 years old, like not being able to get in and out of the car, and like there are doctor's appointments 3 times a week, you're like, okay, I can do X, Y, and Z and probably prevent that. But am I
Mm-hmm.
willing to do it? Am I willing to
Mm-hmm.
get up every day and walk my ass on the treadmill?
Yes.
And that's your decision to make.
Yes. Yes. Willing. And I love that, because I was just thinking about that before talking to you, where I was like, when I think so much, because like we're on social media, we see it, we consume other people's social media. We're on both sides of it, right? Like giving advice and being helpful, and at the
Yeah.
same time being consumers of it, and also looking at people and being like, so and so is doing this, this, and this, on social media or with their social media, whether it's like reels or like being funny or like all sorts of things, right? And then the question is, am I willing and am I able, right? And am I genuinely interested? Like,
Yeah, like
so
for
if
me, reels make me crazy. I'm like, I'm not fucking dancing. I'm not lip syncing. I'm so bad at all of that stuff. I'm not doing that.
yes,
And
yes,
like I
and
draw lines in the sand of like
yes,
what I'm willing to do and what I'm not. And there's some
yes,
things that you're not willing to do because you think they're too hard.
yes,
And that's different. This is
yes,
more just like I really don't like singing and dancing, and that's
Yes.
not part of my platform. So we're just gonna
Yes.
let that one be, but she's really good
Yes.
at that. So I'm gonna let
Yes.
her do that in her
Yes.
space.
I love that. I love it. Like to be able to be very clear about what goes into your joy bucket and then what goes
Yes.
into your drudgery drawer, and then to be okay. And I think what most people, when they're experiencing unhappiness, is they're not ready. Like imagine like you know how like I was thinking Marie Kondo and she's like, does it spark joy? And if it doesn't, get rid of it, right? So these things that we want, these societal expectations, hold them in your hand and ask yourself, are you struggling with whether to do it or not? And does it really belong in the drudgery drawer? And is it okay to say, I'm not somebody who wants to sing and dance to entertain people, right? Like I think of myself as an educator. I like to inform people, but I get it. Entertainment is where it's at. And if one day I feel called, if I have the space suddenly to be more entertaining, whether it's singing or dancing or just being funny, because I know there are a lot of great, engaging mental health videos that people love consuming because they're informative, but they're hands down entertaining. If I feel called and motivated and the stars align, great. But for now, it's going into the drudgery bucket,
Totally,
like drawer.
totally.
I
I
can't
know.
do it. It's not, I'm not called to do it right now, but I'm not saying never. Maybe one
Yeah,
day. Maybe
no,
one day.
nothing is never. And I feel like that's part of the beauty of midlife is you've gotten to this point in your life where you've checked a lot of boxes, you've done a lot of shit you didn't want to do, but you had to do it, right? And you've done all these sort of performance check mark, check, check,
Yes.
check. And now you get to the point in your life where you've kind of like earned the right to sort of do whatever the fuck you want.
Yes, I love that. That should be the title of this podcast. You have earned the right to do whatever the like
Yeah, it's like
100%.
midlife self-obsession is approved. And it's not
Yes.
narcissism. It's like
Yes.
the season of doing fucking me. That's
Yes,
it.
absolutely. Yes. And it could be something new that you're learning. It could be something that you've had to put on the back burner. It's inventing or reinventing. But I would just say, like, whatever it is, be true to yourself. Like, at the end of
Totally.
the day, who are you doing this for? What are you hoping to get out of it? And people won't, I think there's something so embedded in human nature that part of us wants, like, often I'll see people taking on tasks or meanings or identity or homes or clothing or whatever because they think it's going to inspire envy in someone else. And their goal, even though they would never admit it, the goal is if somebody else doesn't want what I have, does what I have even hold meaning? And it's not until you envy my outfit, my anything, fill in the blank. It means nothing. And I would say, F that thinking. That is dangerous thinking. Say to yourself, I'm going to dress or whatever look. I mean, I know a lot of people say I'm doing it for me, but really do it for you. Like if it's not in
Like,
season
would
or in
you do
fashion,
this if no one was watching an
yes,
Instagram, you weren't filming an Instagram reel or,
yes,
all of those things? Like, is
yes,
this really who you are? And I
yes,
think for me, with Instagram and my podcast, the Instagram resonates and the podcast resonates because it's just me unfiltered. Like I'm not trying to be that podcaster. I'm not trying to be that person. Like I'm like, okay, you either like my style and you're here
yes,
for it, you want to be part
yes.
of the irreverent fuck, 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 or you want
Love it.
something that's like more straightforward and more pristine and more perfectly curated. Like, then I'm not your person, and that's cool.
Yes,
And
yes,
that's the
yes,
beauty of midlife and right now and all of our options that are out there is we can choose whatever we want,
yes, yes. 100%.
and I just feel like I just want midlife women to be like, okay, this is my season. I can do
Yes.
this. Not every day feels like $1,000,000, but I can do this. And I feel like that's what you're saying with practical optimism. Also, it's like, hey, you guys, there's some shitty days, there's some shitty
Yes.
feelings, some bad things happen. And
Yes.
we can also have joy and we can also
Yes.
have light.
Yes. And I love that. Like, I think in so many ways, midlife is a beautiful time to reassess, to reevaluate, and also to create because you have this long runway ahead of you and you have a ton of wisdom and life experience behind you. And so, how great and unique position we're in where we get to learn from the past and take chances in the future.
Yeah, and I do like the idea that you talk about when you say, in 1 year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, what does my well-lived life look like? Like, do I want to be in Florida playing golf and working out every day and being in the sun? Or do I want to be in New York City, like going to museums and cool restaurants and like running with like, pretty fast? Like those are very different lives.
Yes, yes. Yes, and then to be very concrete, and practical optimism teaches you that whatever path you want, because like when you're saying that, I'm like, both sound wonderful, right?
I
Like, is there a way
know.
to do to have
Oh,
both? And many
totally. My
people
husband and
do,
I are like
right?
trying to plan that. We're like, okay, empty nest. How are we going to do like our need to be near the beach and the sun and like still wanting to like be in a hustle and bustle?
Yes, yes, exactly. And so, then and it's about like, let's say working backwards, where then you're like, okay, if this is where my goal is, and to give yourself grace with time, because a lot of times people wish that they had all of that like yesterday. And then again, they start beating themselves up. Like, I don't have the economic security, I don't have this. And so rather than getting angry at yourself or envious of other people and their position in life, to say, all right, I'm looking at this friend. They have it all figured out. They seem to have this life that they're able to have both a cosmopolitan lifestyle and also be by the beach. So what does that look like for me, right? So maybe I'm not buying the 17 bedroom palace oceanfront retirement home. Okay, but for me, a pied a terre, like maybe a studio apartment by the beach, or not even by the beach. Maybe it's 2 miles, maybe it's five
Yeah.
miles. So like work within your own reasonable, realistic time frame, budget, all of that, but that you still afford yourself. And maybe it's not even ever owning the home by the beach. Maybe it's like, I do a timeshare, I do an Airbnb, I
No,
go there
like there
four
was
times a
always
year.
that like that famous research study where they talk about people's happiness and meaning in life. And like they took people who, remodeled their kitchen and they compared it to people who bought homes or condos near a hiking trail. And they found, as you would expect, that the people who bought the homes near the hiking trail ended up happier because that was the gift that kept on giving, where the newness and the novelty of the new kitchen kind of wore off.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And
And
it's
the
a
gift that
little
kept,
of figuring that out for yourself. Like, what's your
yes.
hiking trail?
Yes, I love that. I love that. But I think the essence is just knowing that, to me, practical optimism, it's a philosophy, it's a lifestyle, it's a mission, it's a movement that you keep coming back to, that you're like, I got this, like I've got this figured out. I've got, whether you use it to like have a friend group or like a reading, like an accountability partner, whether it's one person, whether it's your book club that's like, okay, we're going to take this on, but how are we going to hold each other accountable and like working through these pillars, because each one of them is so different. After you have purpose, you then want to learn how to process your emotions. Then you want to problem solve. You want to develop a sense of pride. And we got into some of the self-compassion. You then want to develop a sense of proficiency, like this, I can do, I am capable. And how do you do that, right? The steps of getting feedback and getting role models and mentors. And then how do you stay present in the digital age? How do you cultivate a people practice? We talked about the meaningful engagement part of the four M's. Then there's, the other part of the four M's where you had meaningful engagement, mastery, movement, and mindfulness. The last one is practicing healthy habits. And practical optimism is a habit unto itself, but it's also the habit that begets all habits. Because you could literally take anything you want in life, and I could run it through this 8 pillars, and I could be like, if you want financial freedom, whatever it is you want, you run it through the same 8 steps. So the 8 steps are kind of your guide, or like what would I do if I want to be very intentional? And how do you turn your purpose, sort of like purpose into passion, and then passion into purpose? Because they really, bi-directionally feed each other. Sometimes you need to have very just a clear-cut, rational set of steps, and that begets passion. It's kind of like you're passionate about someone in the beginning, let's say in a relationship, right? But that's not necessarily meant for the long haul, and that's okay too, right? A passion doesn't always turn into a purpose, right? Like you can play around, take on identities. So like I'm going to try the yoga class. I try that, a lot of times people are like, oh, I want to be like a yoga instructor. Halfway through, they give it up. That's okay too, right? It's okay. So I say pause, don't stop. If you're on a mission of learning and self-discovery and journey, sometimes you're exhausted by all the learning. You're like, I don't want to learn anymore. I just want to be. That's cool too.
Yeah, no, I love that because I think like we should all be able to say when someone's like, what do you do? Like to be able to say, I'm a self-expander.
I
Whatever
love that.
that, whatever that
Yeah.
is. It could be
Yes.
so many things. And like, I don't take the summer off for my podcast in the last 3 years, but like I recorded a couple extra episodes because I'm going on a 2-week college tour with my daughter and I don't want to be stressed about that. So I'm like, it's like a plan. It's like
Yes.
self-advocacy and a plan of like, I don't want to feel this, so I'm going to do this. I'm going to put
Yes.
the extra time in now. And I loved the way you talk about it in your book, because it's also the way I try to parent too, in terms
Hmm.
of like self-advocacy. Like, you were talking about how you were in college in an organic chemistry class and the teacher was kind of an asshole and like he wanted to fail everyone, and you and two women got together and were like, okay, this doesn't work for us and we're going to change it. Or talking to your neighbor and saying like, hey, like my neighbor has 5 barking dogs. I've listened to them for, I've only lived in this house for 3 years. I've listened to them for 2 years, starting
Oh,
at
wow.
6:30 in the morning. Okay. And then I woke up like a year ago and I was like, you know what? I'm kind of fucking done with the neighbors barking dogs. Like, I'm really done with that. So I went over there and my husband was like, what are you doing? And I was like, oh, I'm done. So I was super nice, but I self-advocated. The dogs no longer bark, because, but it
Wonderful.
took me 20,
Yes.
it took me going over there and probably 20 texts over a course of 4 months to say like, hey guys, I'm happy you have 5 dogs and I'm glad you enjoy them, but I did not move to this house to be awakened by your dogs and every night and all day while I'm trying to record a podcast, managing my nervous system that's listening to your dogs.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
not everyone is willing to like jump in the arena and stand up for
Yes.
themselves. And I
Yes.
feel like I hope that I feel like I got that from my mom of like, you don't like this, let's fix it. And it's not about being bratty or high
Hmm.
maintenance. It's
Hmm.
about making something work for you so that it feels
Yes.
good.
Yes. And the way you handle it is also in a very respect. I mean, I don't know. You'll have to tell me how, what finally did it? Can I ask you what finally did it? Were they like,
It was like I first went over there, they apologized, sent a gift, whatever. And then it was like quiet for like a week. And then I kind of came back a little bit. And then I texted again. And then I said, I'm recording this thing in my backyard and filming all day. Like, I really can't have any of the barking. And they accommodated that. And then there were a few texts where they were a little upset that I was texting them. And then I just said, if you are an upstanding person in a neighborhood that we live in, no one else is willing to say something except for me. But I'm telling you, it does not make people feel good because other neighbors are talking about it, but nobody wants to say anything. And so they built a fence. They think that the fence, I guess, is going to help with the dog smelling my dog or whatever, and that's fine. They basically knocked all of our trees over and didn't take responsibility for it, but that's my husband's job. I'm not dealing with that too. So we like divide and conquer. Now he's dealing with the landscaper and the neighbor and the contractor and that whole thing. But it's just about when something doesn't work
yes,
and
yes,
you're 49 years old, it's like, I
yes,
didn't sign up for this shit.
totally, totally. And that's the beauty, I think, in midlife is that you finally feel ready to ask for things.
Yeah. And I hope that more women and more girls and
Yes.
teenagers like find that inner strength, like you talked about in college, of like, hey, you're teaching this course for people to fail.
Mm-hmm.
And it doesn't need to be this way.
It doesn't. And and it's so interesting to me because whatever it is, like fill in the blank with whatever your own, version of that is, that it's like the beauty is that, organic chemistry like has always been seen as this very intimidating, it's going to weed people out. And it was so sad that so many people who were meant to be doctors and could have been, if it wasn't this one huge stumbling block. And it was like, is this system rigged? Like, do you really want, you just don't, like, is this a like barrier that you're putting in the way on purpose? Because then when I learned it, and we were the first 3 people to get A's in this class in 30 years, and this professor was like, women don't understand, they don't have this visual spatial reasoning. And I was like, this is such a beautiful, like it was so, kind of like what we're talking about. It's such a beautiful rational science in the sense that they gave you all these like little like reagents, like these components, like puzzle pieces, and then they're like, this is what the finished product should look like. And you have to work both forward and backwards to create it. And then they want to see all the steps. And so it's interesting because for me, once I learned it, I was like, life is like this, and like when I work with patients in therapy, I think about the end in mind. I think about the end goal, the product, the finished product. What do I want that to look like? Whether it's an organic chemistry problem, and I ended up tutoring for many years. What do I want the finished product to look like? In this case, like now as a psychiatrist, my life or my patient's life. These are the beginning pieces that I've been given in life. This is the hand I've been dealt. And then how do I go forward and continue to construct, work towards the finished product? And at times, I don't know, and I don't know what the middle is going to look like, but then I'm going to work backwards. And sort of you're joining this chain of events from both ends, going forward and then working backwards with the end in mind. And so
I
it
like
kind of
that.
became a metaphor, in many
Yeah, because
ways.
I
And
also feel like a lot of people are like, don't reverse engineer your life. That's so controlling and you're trying to control over everything, but you almost have to. And it doesn't mean that you're deciding every step along the way backwards, but you have to figure out like kind of what your end goal is and like
Mhm.
what are the steps it's going to take to get you there.
Yes. And Sarah, something you said, I think this is really important for, like, let's say moms who are listening right now, or people who are raising young people. Like if you're raising a teenager or a teenage girl, for example, like one of the things, if I were to give in sort of like wisdom of like someone who's lived, and we were talking about relationships and our partners, that one of the best things like is having a very supportive partner in life. And I feel like that's one of the most important life decisions that you can make, and the most important one, right? Look, why do people spend more time investigating their manicurist, their hair colorist, and not the same amount of time thinking and being very careful about who they, you know, attach their wagon to, so to speak, right? Because like, and so I think what I'm seeing, and this is maybe top of mind, literally because I had sessions with, young women this week in their 20s and 30s and finding themselves and making decisions in relationships. And I want to empower, like we're able to speak about midlife wisdom and the freedom and the agency that comes from years of heartbreak and letdown and disappointment and grief and having to advocate and rejection. And if I could give that wisdom and speak to younger me or younger whoever, it would be do the same due diligence in your relationships. Because I see a lot of women are able to speak out, let's say, if they are, and God bless them if they are in their careers or in their friendships or with their parents, all the talking back, take that fierceness, right? Like you're giving me sassy ass as a
Yeah.
kid, preteen, direct that and make the right choice with your partner, and don't put up with nonsense, because a lot of times people are like, oh, so and so, they're putting me on the back burner. I don't want to be somebody's option. I'm in their rotation. And I'm like, no, that's not acceptable. So even the women that are listening that might be like, post divorce or post breakup and maybe now finding themselves looking for love again, I would just say it's not easy, but having these high standards that we do have at this point in our life, like keep them, raise the bar, set the bar high for how people treat you.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people also, I mean, all of us do, like we said before, we want a partner who's going to satisfy all those things. But at the same time, we sometimes we need to be those things also.
Exactly.
Like I want a
Yes.
partner who cooks because I hate cooking. But like Jeremy doesn't want to cook and I don't want to cook. So we're like, okay, fuck it. We'll meet halfway and we'll both be tortured together and cook.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
love
and
that.
it's kind
Yeah.
of it's a little bit of the reverse engineering, I guess. It's like let's be miserable together and figure out how to
Yes.
cut an
Yes.
onion with the skin or without. But I think like the summary of all of this in my mind is self-agency, ownership. Obviously, we're born with certain things, we have certain life circumstances, and all of us are different. And obviously, accommodating and managing all of that is really hard. And at
Hmm.
the same time, being open to building these skills out of saying yes to more of the things that we want. Like that woman from
Yeah.
Israel whose son was executed, and she's like flying to New York and LA to talk to all these
Wow.
people about her experience and what's going on in Israel and all of these things. And you're just like, how does she do that? Like, how does
Mhm.
she dig deep enough into herself to be able to rise above this? Like, would I be even able to get out of bed? I
Mhm,
don't know.
mhm,
I
mhm,
hope so. But when I
mhm,
saw her, I was like, wow, I want to be part of the 25%.
mhm, mhm. And a key part of that is the giving back, and I there's so many studies on, in whatever way you're able to like volunteer, we see that like giving something back to someone else is the last thing anyone is thinking about in the midst of their grief. And like it sounds like, no, but I should be selfish. And it's like, okay, take the time, grieve, absolutely. But once your head is able to come above water, be like, how can I make meaning of this? Can I share my wisdom or experience? How do I make sense? Because the loss has already been experienced, right? And then how do I create meaning for myself? And the last thing you want to do is to be alone when you're hurting, right? So for some people, they may say, like I could see this woman even say, because I've had patients who have said to me, thank you, because you're like, thank you for coming from
No,
Israel.
that's
Thank
what
you
she
for
was
coming.
saying. She was like,
Yeah.
thank you for being here. And I'm like, what?
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to feel like I like that all this didn't go in vain. Like they want to
Yeah.
create that if I can do something, and you see this a lot, if I can do something to help somebody else, it, it's not going to bring me back my loved one and my losses, right? But if I can alleviate your pain and suffering, because that's a very key fundamental human need, is mattering, right? To matter to somebody else.
Totally. Totally. And like yesterday was kind of a unique day because my daughter has this initiative that she started called Our Seat at the Table, which is fostering belonging community through cooking. Can you believe my daughter is obsessed with
Love.
cooking and I'm like, I hate it. I'm so bad at it. And she had taught 12 girls how to bake over the weekend, and they baked cookies and cupcakes and decorated them for women, teen girls in a homeless shelter with children. So yesterday when we went to drop them off, we spent 4 hours there with the teen moms and their kids. And I was telling my friend about it last night when we were coming back from the Israel event. And she's like, I feel like I've lost that like tactile volunteering where like my hands are getting dirty. She's like, I'm so used to writing checks
Hmm.
because I'm 52 years old and I write checks to this organization and that organization. But she was like, can I come next time? Like, I want to organize the diapers and like the food pantry. I want to get my hands
Yes.
dirty. And it
Yes.
made me think like, maybe some of us are in our own versions, like getting too
Hmm.
stuck in the check writing and not the
Yes.
doing.
Yes, absolutely. Like the pleasure that you get. I mean, I think there is pleasure in knowing, like, okay, I have contributed
Yes.
resources to somebody else's happiness, but you're not seeing the smile on their face in
Yeah.
person. You're not
Like
getting
these
the hug.
two-year-old kids squeezing the teddy bears and holding these like
Oh my
dripping
God.
pink cookies. There was like, you can't even explain that.
Yes, yes. And that boosts oxytocin, right?
Oh
Like
my
the cuddle
God.
and bonding hormone of
Yeah,
like you
except I
feel
went
like,
from there to the Israeli mom and I was like, oh my God, I didn't sleep last night. I was like, this is like the
oh,
most emotional day ever.
yes, yes, yes. But you're making a difference. And I feel like that when you're contributing, and even in this podcast, like everything that you're doing, it's impact, right? And we all want to feel like we matter, that we're leaving a legacy in some way, that's something, because otherwise, if you think about it, everything you're doing, if it's one to one, it's like, okay, I did it, but now it's over. Like I think that's why a lot of people hate cooking, because they're like, I spent 4 hours and then the meal was eaten in 15 minutes. So like there's nothing to show for it, right?
Totally.
So being able to take pleasure in something that's fleeting and ephemeral, but also something that's long lasting, right? So I feel like the conversations that you're having, the people and the ideas that you're giving, a chance to, on your platform, that's one very important contribution, is people are listening and they're like, I can identify, thank you for doing this, like
Yeah,
you
or
made
like,
my day,
oh,
i
I'm
feel i
gonna
feel
go
heard.
get my hands dirty now, and it's like I
Yes,
sometimes we
yes,
don't know what we're craving until we hear someone say something that's like,
yes,
oh wait, maybe I should be like organizing a food pantry and a homeless
yes,
shelter rather than
yes,
just writing the check. Not that the check's not
yes,
important, but it's a
yes,
different feeling.
yes. And you know what, different people are capable of different things at different places in their life. So like maybe there's going to be a friend that, like, everyone has a different strength. So there's going to be the friend that writes the check. We need them, God bless them, right? Then the other
Yes.
person's like, I don't have a check to give you, but I can show up and I can do the work, right? Another person. So I think
Oh
that's
yeah, and then
also
the
totally
woman
fine.
I was with, she's like the board chair and she like loves setting up, board retreats and process and all of the, and I'm like, "Oh my God, my brain hurts from that." But
Yes,
that's
yes,
her specialty. And it's like
yes,
whatever your specialty is,
yes,
find it, figure that
Totally.
out and bring it to the table.
100%. 100%. I love that.
Oh my God. Okay. I could talk to you for 15 hours. We got to wrap this thing up. Okay. All right. If listeners want to find you, where can they find you?
So I'm going to send, Sarah, you're going to get a book in the mail, but
Oh, so
this
good.
Practical Optimism, the art, science, and practice of exceptional well-being. I love the cover. We
It's
spent
so
hours and
good.
days. It's going to be available wherever books are sold. Comes out February 20th. It's probably already out by now by the date. And they can find me on Instagram, the word Dr. Sue Varma, written out, Doctor Sue Varma, and my website, the word doctor, suvarma.com. So DOCTORSUE Varma.com. So
I
I
love
would
you that
love
you
to hear.
spelled it because I always make people spell their names.
Yeah, because people sometimes, a lot of
Yeah.
times people have the habit of the DR, right?
Yeah,
The DR with the
totally.
doctor. Yeah. So then
Yeah.
they're like, I can't find you. And I was like, and I'm across all social platforms, but probably, the whole word written out, but most active on Instagram. And I want people, when they read it, to tag me, to share the pillar that interests them. If you're doing the 4 M's of mental health, tag me, let me know what exercise, what you're doing, meaningful conversations. If you're on the beach, take a picture of yourself, or wherever you are in life. People are sending pictures of themselves in the swimming pool with their dog, like all, their child holding it, they're cozying up to a coffee in bed. So I want to know from all of you, how is practical optimism making an impact in your life?
I love that. I want everyone to start thinking about what they can start doing today, one small step. I think my favorite part of this conversation for this podcast right now is purpose. Evolving purpose, finding purpose, aligning with purpose, changing your purpose, whatever it is, find it, because that is what connects us to ourselves and to the world and makes things meaningful. I want to thank you, Sue, for being a new friend and a guest of the
Thank you.
Flexible Neurotic podcast.
Thank you. I had so
Oh
much
my
fun
God,
talking to you.
so much fun.
I think that like also going back to our instincts, our intuition, like if we really want to solve them, we'll find the right people. But you're right, it has become a little bit tricky and complicated these days because the good doctors, the functional naturopaths, or even a OB that's really good, they don't spend the time with you to find out what's going on in your life.